is a 1993 Cadillac Allante, and it was Cadillac's flagship luxury convertible in the late 1980s and early 1990s. It was also a complete failure, but a lovable one with a great story and some interesting quirks. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my new online enthusiast car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. If you're looking to sell a modern, cool car, sell it with Cars and Bids, you will get the most money for your cool car. If you're looking to buy a cool car from the modern era, same deal, buy it with Cars and Bids. We have live auctions of cool cars happening all the time. Check it out at carsandbids.com. First, a little overview of the Allante. This car came out for the 1987 model year, and it was conceived as a flagship Cadillac luxury convertible. And it was intended to rival the Mercedes-Benz SL and the Jaguar XJS. The thinking was it was an aspirational car. Maybe you couldn't afford an Allante, but you'd see one on the street and you'd think, wow, that looks cool. What is that, a Cadillac? Maybe I should consider Cadillac for my next purchase. To make it especially desirable, Cadillac gave the Allante a fancy foreign-sounding name, Allante. And they hired Pininfarina to design it, which was the same company that was designing Ferraris at the time. In fact, Pininfarina built the body for the Allante in Italy, and then production was completed in Michigan, which I'll get to in a little bit. But anyway, there was some European in this car. Unfortunately, not enough European. The Allante was front-wheel drive, unlike its competitors, and it was pretty expensive. The 93 model started at around $60,000, which is about $105,000 in today's money. Imagine paying over $100 grand for a front-wheel drive Cadillac convertible. By comparison, the Mercedes SL 500 at the time started around $63,000, so it was only a little bit more expensive to get the newly redesigned, iconic Mercedes SL instead of yet another General Motors concoction designed to help revive Cadillac. Fortunately, the Allante did have a V8, although General Motors screwed that up too, which I'll get to in a minute. I'm also going to get to everything else, because today I'm going to review the Allante, and I'm going to start by showing you all of the quirks and features of Cadillac's flagship convertible from the late 80s and early 90s. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DougScore. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Allante with getting in, and that means we must discuss the gold keys. Cadillacs from this era came with a set of gold keys. Cadillac thought this was a selling point. They actually advertised you got gold keys when you bought your car, as if this was some major point of luxury. Other brands were innovating with new technology and features. Cadillac was giving you gold keys. And of course, you can see the gold is kind of flaked off over the years, so it's not like it really added any value. Although it is rare to still see the gold keys today, most people lost them over the years and got replacements that were just normal silver keys. With that said, although I'm chiding Cadillac for touting its gold keys and not making advancements, this car was in fact full of technological advancements. 80s technological advancements, the best kind. And you see the most important one when you first turn on the car, this digital dash, this digital gauge cluster screen where everything is electronic. And you can see as I press the accelerator, the tachometer climbs electronically to show you what the future was. Electronic gauge clusters, which of course actually turned out to be true since most cars now use gauge cluster screens. Cadillac was just a little early. Now, General Motors used electronic gauge cluster screens in a lot of cars, and frankly, I think it was supposed to be kind of airplane-y, which is also why you have this little plus in the middle, like some sort of airplane cockpit dial. That was just a thing they did back then. Over on the right, you can see the gauges for the fuel, the engine temperature, that sort of thing, and you can also see a few buttons over there. One of of them says English metric. If you press that, it instantly switches between miles and kilometers on the odometer and miles per hour, kilometers per hour, and you can just switch back and forth every time you enter Canada or drive your Allante in Europe. But maybe more interesting than the electronic gauge cluster situation in this car is the center control stack, which from a simple look is already clearly going to be odd. For one thing, it's tilted way towards the driver. The passenger has basically no access to it, and it's just full of buttons, an enormous amount of buttons in here. So let's take it from the top. You start with electronic climate control, as it proudly displays. Nothing too unusual here, except for this little lever control to adjust where the air comes out, down or up, and you can kind of move the lever depending on where you want the air. It's an odd control for that feature. By the way, one interesting thing about that little switch that controls the positioning of the air for the climate control, you have the option to change it from down to up and a bunch of things in between, which makes sense, but you can also just put it on normal if you want to. What exactly is normal? Is that down? Is that up? How did Cadillac determine what a normal position was for air blowing on you? A little bit more unusual, below the climate controls, you have the driver information center. I don't know why it has to say that. Why can't it just provide information and you figure out that it's the driver information center, because that's plainly obvious. It didn't need to be labeled. But anyway, in its default configuration, this shows the date and the time, pretty standard like you'd expect, but you can also press these buttons below it to see other items, like for instance, your average speed, your average fuel economy, your range, and then there's an unusual one. There's a button marked fuel used. I guess you can reset this when you fill up and see exactly how many gallons of fuel you've used if for some reason range and fuel economy measurements aren't quite good enough for you. By the way, one other thing I like about that driver information center, when you turn on the car, it actually says good morning very briefly, because it knows what time it is, and so it knows it's morning, and it's just welcoming you to your Allante experience. But undoubtedly the best item in the center control stack is at the bottom, and that would be the CD player. This was one of the very first cars ever sold with a CD player, and you can see this area has an enormous amount of buttons, although not quite enough. Here's what I mean. The CD is currently in. You might be wondering, how do you go forward and change the track? Well, it's none of these buttons up here. This controls like radio, sound, and presets. It's also not the button below the CD that says forward. That just skips ahead. It doesn't change the track. Instead, if you want to change the track to the next one, you press the seek button, which was there for the cassette player. They just hid a second function in that button for the CD player. It goes to the next track. If you want to go back a track, you press the repeat button, and then it will take you back. Again, another cassette player button that had a hidden function for the CD player. It's so funny that with all of these buttons in here, Cadillac couldn't come up with simple buttons to skip to the next track on a CD, which seems so obvious now. By the way, if the hidden buttons weren't weird enough, you're paying close attention, you probably realized they're reversed. The button for the next track is seek, which is on the left. The button for the previous track is repeat, which is on the right. So if you want to switch to the next track, you actually press the left button, and previous track is the right button, which is switched from every other CD player. But again, this was an early attempt at a CD player in a car. One other interesting item, at the very bottom of the center control stack, you have little lights next to CD in and tape in to let you know if you had a CD already in the slot or a tape, so you didn't accidentally try to stick another one in there. Very useful. And next up, we move on to the center console between the seats. We start with the gear lever, which is one of these 80s, 90s GM gear levers, very tall with like a T shape. Definitely does not look good, but it was functional. Now, also in this area, you'll see there are no cup holders. That wasn't really all that common in this era, but Cadillac did want its drivers to be able to enjoy a drink, and so if you open up the center armrest, you can see this little folded piece of plastic. If you unfold it, well, out pop cup holders, and then you can stick your drinks in there. When you don't want them anymore, just fold them back up, stick them back in the armrest, and you don't have cup holders. Pretty good idea, actually. And speaking of this center armrest area, if you fold up the center armrest, below that you have a storage area. You open up the lid and you can see storage, but also buttons to open open up the trunk and the fuel door. Now these were in here because you could lock this center console. And that way you could park the car with the roof down, or you could give it to a valet. You could lock this center console and then no one would be able to access your trunk or your fuel door. Pretty simple. Now, most Cadillac models from this era had the fuel door button and the trunk button in the glove box, which had basically the same purpose, but the Allante doesn't. The glove box is notable in this vehicle, though. For one thing, it pulls kind of towards you, which is a little bit strange, but you get it open and it is a fairly standard glove box with the original owner's manual, the 93 Allante owner's manual. And you can see on the first few pages, it gets into the gold keys and how special they are and how that's what you got when you got a new Cadillac and all this gold key delivery crap. And it seemed like something they really believed in at the time, giving you gold keys to signify luxury, I guess. Now, one other item in the owner's manual is this little pamphlet that kind of explains quickly how to open and close the roof, since this is obviously a convertible. And that pamphlet was useful because the roof is rather difficult to open or close. The process is basically this. With the roof down, the first thing you do is go next to the driver's seat in the door jamb area. You can see two latches and a switch. You pull the switch marked cover to open up this rear cover behind the seats. You pop it open and then you can see that's where the roof is stored. Now, from there, you manually pull the roof out from its little storage area and bring it up to about where it would close on the windshield. But you don't do anything to close it just yet. Instead, you go behind the seats again. There's this little red tab and you lock it in place, which will be important to make sure the top can seal around the windshield. Now, once that is locked, then you press this little switch in the driver's door jamb area to lock down the top on the windshield itself. Then you unrelease this little red tab and take the back part of the top and put it down on the cover, and it automatically locks into place, and then the roof is on. It is quite a process, multi-step manual with different levers and switches, and putting it down is the same level of cumbersome. Not exactly the easiest convertible top to operate, especially for the price that this car cost. But back to the interior, where there are more interesting quirks and features to discuss, including a very unusual quirk with the window switches. Now, over on the driver's side, you can see there are two switches, one marked L for left window, of course, the other marked R for right window. Pretty simple. Over on the passenger side, you just have one switch and it's marked R for right window, but you don't have the control for the left window. So why did they feel the need to mark it for the right window? Of course it's the right window. Obviously Cadillac just didn't want to make a different switch for the passenger side, so they just made extra R switches. A rather sad example of cost cutting. And next up, a few interesting items to the left of the steering wheel underneath the digital gauge cluster. One of them is the Twilight Sentinel. Which seems like maybe the name of a romance novel. Actually, that's what General Motors called its automatic headlights back in the late 80s and early 90s. If you had this on, the Twilight Sentinel would turn on the headlights when it got dark. A strange name for a pretty common feature now. Also in this area, you had the headlight controls, which were kind of strange. For one thing, the main headlights are on this button that's raised up. You push that and it turns on the headlights. To turn them off, you can press the lights off button and then they will go off, or you can just press the headlight button again and they will also go off. So lights off was kind of redundant, but hey, it was there if you really wanted to turn your lights off. So I want to talk turn signals for a second. You put on the turn signal in the normal way, just push the stalk down, they turn on. The thing I find strange is when you put on the turn signals, the little light in the gauge cluster that tells you they're on doesn't specify which turn signal is on. Now, it was pretty common for older cars to do that, just let you know a turn signal is on, but this car has this jet plane style digital gauge cluster, very advanced, and yet it can't tell you which turn signal is on. Seems kind of ridiculous, but it was General Motors in the early 90s. And next up, let's talk Pininfarina, which was the Italian company that designed this car to compete with the Europeans, the Mercedes SL, the Jaguar XJS. Now that was a pretty big deal getting Pininfarina on this project because, like I said, they designed Ferraris at the time, and they probably should still. Pininfarina made a lot of beautiful cars over the years, frankly, including this one. I think this car looked really nice, especially in the period. It definitely turned heads on the road. And Cadillac was very proud of the fact that Pininfarina designed their car. There were badges all over. For instance, at the bottom of that button-filled center control stack, you had a Pininfarina badge loudly telling passengers who designed the car. Also on the door sill, you have the Cadillac badge and logo and the Pininfarina logo right next to it. And of course, on the front fenders right here, Pininfarina again with the Pininfarina logo. Cadillac was really proud of this car's Italian heritage, but like I mentioned earlier, it went beyond just the design. Pininfarina actually built the bodies to this car, and they made them in Italy. But the car finished production in Michigan, and the logistics are almost unbelievable. After Pininfarina finished making the body to an Allante, it was then flown on a specially configured Boeing 747 directly to Detroit. They flew 56 of them at a time for 6 years. This car's entire production run, Boeing 747s going back and forth between Italy and Michigan carrying Allante bodies. When the bodies showed up, the car was finished and then it was shipped off to dealers. This is one of the reasons why pricing for the Allante was so high, because the production process involved going on a 747 across the world. It was insane. But it did allow Cadillac to claim that this car had Italian heritage, both design and production, which frankly was true. And next up, some other interesting quirks and features on the outside of the Allante. For one thing, the taillights have lines in them. You have these little silver lines going across the entire taillight, except it leaves a hole where you have the model name Allante over here, and over on the other side, another hole where it says Cadillac to make sure you could really tell what this car was. And that's the part that lights up. When you have the brake lights on or the turn signals, Cadillac and Allante both light up to make sure you know that this is a Cadillac Allante. Now, that is not the most interesting thing about the brake lights. That honor goes to the third brake light, which is right here, this little circle on the trunk lid above the keyhole, which is such a strange place for a third brake light, and it's so odd to have a circle on this otherwise very squared off 80s looking car. Now, the third brake light became a requirement here in the United States in like 86, 87, and like I said, this car came out in 87, and I suspect it got pretty far along in the design process before they realized they needed to add a third brake light. And so my thought is that was going to be a Cadillac logo, and they had to kind of hastily turn it into a third brake light so this car could go into production, which is why you have that weird circle there where a Cadillac logo should be. One thing I've always loved about the Allante is the location of the fuel door. You look on the back fender, it's not there. You look on the other side, again, it's not there. So where did they put it? Well, check this out. It's integrated into the side of the car right behind the door. You would never know it's there, and you don't need some ugly little cutout for the fuel door, which looks nice. Although I will say it could get kind of annoying having the fuel door in that spot, because you pull up to a pump to fill up and you have to open your driver's door right where the pump is, because that's where the fuel door is. It's always a little bit easier to have it in the back so you have more space, but it looks nicer this way, no doubt. And finally, we move under the hood where you can see this car's V8, the Northstar V8, which was a really big deal at the time. Now, there's a story that goes along with this engine, which is also about General Motors' incompetence, which was the subject of a lot of General Motors related stories from this era. So here's the story. When this car came out in 87, it had a V8, but it made only 170 horsepower, which was not enough. And General Motors quickly realized that, and after only 2 model years, they gave it a bigger V8. But that one only had 200 horsepower. And again, it just wasn't enough to truly compete with the Europeans on the level they wanted to, especially considering the price point for this car. So for the 1993 model year, Cadillac gave the Allante the Northstar V8, which was a new engine, state-of-the-art, fantastic, 290 horsepower. It finally gave this car the performance it deserved. 0 to 60 in the low 6-second range, which was absolutely a huge figure at the time. Amazing. The Allante finally had the right powertrain. And then General Motors canceled it. So it only had the good engine for one model year, 1993, like this car, before the Allante went away, which is so perfect General Motors from that era, refining a car and making it better until it's finally where it should have been when it came out, and then completely discontinuing it altogether. It was such a shame that the Allante was never given a really good powertrain when it first made its debut, because it really could have been a success. And the Northstar was a really good powertrain back then, 30 years ago. And so those are the quirks and features of the 1993 Cadillac Allante. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the Northstar Allante. I have wanted to review one of these for a very long time, and people have reached out with nice ones, but never a Northstar. The Northstar is rare, one model year only, and it's the one you absolutely wanted to drive. It had way more power, way better performance than your standard Allante models with the 4.1 and the 4.5 liter V8s. First thing you notice when you drive this car, it drives like a General Motors car of the period. It doesn't feel too big or heavy, but it's not tight or incredibly sporty. That's not really what they were going for either. It was trying to be a Grand Tourer kind of car like an SL. All right, flooring it here. Wow. Whoa. Wow. This is actually pretty quick. Yeah, this is actually pretty quick. That was an impressive acceleration. I'm surprised. Then again, I guess I shouldn't be. I mean, you get in a GM car from this era and you just think slow. The Riata I was in, the Oldsmobile Silhouette I did, but many others I did in late 80s Cadillac sedan, just slow, 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 slow. But I've seen the numbers and I know that this car isn't slow. And there's a lot of cowl shake in this car. Again, it wasn't really put together, meaning that the windshield kind of shakes when I go over bumps. It wasn't really put together with the quality of modern vehicles, but it was pretty much put together with the quality of vehicles at its time. Most of them also weren't, the best built. The Northstar really is the one you want, of course. It has the most power, the best performance, but as we all know, these Northstar engines, as they've aged, they've had head gasket problems, overheating issues, which has not been great for any vehicle that the Northstar is in up until they changed it in like the early 2000s. In an Allante, it's probably worth the value to replace the head gasket. It's a few $1,000 job, but this car is still worth, I don't know, maybe $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 on a really good day. And these are special cars. Surprising amount of road noise in here. You do hear, and it's wind noise, not tire noise quite as much. You do hear on the outside. So the top probably isn't quite as sealed and insulated as a modern convertible car. It is cool to drive this thing. Yeah, it was front wheel drive. Yeah, it never was really the SL that General Motors is going for. It never really developed that reputation. But these were stylish. In my opinion, they look good. It looks maybe boxy by modern standards, but I remember as a kid seeing these on the road and thinking, that is a pretty nice looking car. The decision to go front wheel drive, I do think kind of harmed this vehicle a little bit. It made it seem like a little bit less of a real contender at the time. Back then, pretty much every Cadillac was front wheel drive except for the really biggest sedan. They didn't really have a choice. Front wheel drive was the platform they had. But, the other stuff in this segment was all rear wheel drive. Overall, you just don't see Allantes anymore. The Northstar models are quick. They perform well. They're reasonably fast. They don't drive all that well. The interior is a relic, but this is a cool car. And when the owner of this one reached out to me, I was like, I gotta review this thing. These videos on these 80s, 90s GM and American cars, they don't do all that well. They don't get that many views, but I am personally so excited to film these cars and see exactly what life was like, back then. Japanese cars from this era were a lot more simple. And American cars, they were trying so much stuff with this digital dash and all sorts of different innovations, CD player, and it was just, not all of it was good. But it's interesting to see through the lens of modern time, modern standards. And so that's the 1993 Cadillac Allante. This is an interesting car, if a bit misguided. As usual, General Motors saw Cadillac lagging, and they saw rival luxury convertibles, and they thought they could shortcut their way into sales success with a front-wheel drive car, and no, really, it has some Italian heritage, we promise. It didn't really work, but not many of these have survived in the last 30 years, but I'm thrilled that this one did because I have always wanted to review the Allante. And now it's time to give the Allante a DougScore. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the Allante's Pininfarina design looks good, but it certainly shows its age with its boxy square lines, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in the high 6-second range, and it gets a 2 out of 10. Handling is sharper than I was expecting, but it's still a 30-year-old Cadillac, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Fun factor is decent. This isn't incredibly fast or sporty, but it's pretty good at both, and it's a cool top-down cruiser. It gets a 4 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and these are becoming cool. This weird Italian-American Cadillac Pininfarina mashup, especially with the bigger engine like this one. It gets a 5 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 20 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. This is well equipped for the time, but below average today, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Comfort is pretty good, but not truly excellent, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Same deal with quality. Pretty good, but that Northstar and its head gasket issues bump it down a rung, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Practicality is normal for a car like this, and it gets a 2 out of 10. Value, this is a bit of an oddball. These are cheap. 10 grand buys a decent one, which isn't much for a flagship Cadillac with Pininfarina design, but they're also outdated and not terribly fast, and they made a lot of them. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 23 out of 50. Added up, and the DougScore is 43 out of 100, which places the Allante here against other sort of similar cars from this era. The best competitors are probably the Buick Riata, Jaguar XJS, and Acura Legend Coupe, and the Allante either beats or ties all of them. The Allante is surprisingly fun to drive, at least with the Northstar, and it's a cool relic of a bygone era from Cadillac.